Manchester-Boston Regional Airport, New Hampshire, July 31, 1973. On the tarmac, a McDonnell Douglas DC-9 airliner of Delta Airlines, recently landed from Burlington for refueling, is preparing to depart for its final destination, Boston, operating Flight 723. There are 89 people on board the aircraft, 83 passengers, and 6 crew members. And experienced pilots are preparing to operate the aircraft. Captain John N. Streil, 49 years old. First Officer Sidney W. Burrill, 31 years old. Additionally, pilot observer Joseph E. Burrell, 52 years old, is also in the cockpit. 3 flight attendants are working in the passenger cabin. At 9:12, the dispatcher gives clearance to our crew for takeoff, and the aircraft lifts off from the runway, setting course for Boston.
Delta 723. The airport is temporarily closed due to weather conditions. Proceed to the holding area.
Due to the inclement weather in Boston, the controller instructs our crew to proceed to the holding area and await further instructions. However, by 10:50, the controller informs that the weather is improving and grants permission to commence the descent to Logan Airport.
Delta 723. The airport is open. Commence descent. Approach via the Lawrence radio beacon. Without delay, approach on 4 right. Altimeters at Boston are 3011, overcast cloud base at 400 feet. Visibility half a mile, fog.
Boston approach, information received. Proceeding via Lawrence on 4 right. Pressure 3001, Delta 723.
After leaving the holding pattern, our crew first needs to climb to a circuit altitude of 1,200 meters and then execute the approach procedure for runway 4 right. During this climb, the pilot observer asks the captain if there are any issues, to which the captain responds that there are none.
Boston approach, approaching the Lawrence radio beacon, Delta 723.
Delta 723, maintain heading 180, approach to runway 04 right.
The crew acknowledges the instruction and begins to turn to heading 180 degrees. At that moment, the pilot observer informs the commander that they are deviating from the landing approach pattern, but the commander is confident in their actions and insists that they are doing everything correctly.
Delta 723 descending to 3,000 feet, turning to heading 220.
Roger, Boston approach descending to 3,000, heading 220.
The crew begins the descent with the turn, after which the approach controller gives our crew several more instructions to change course. At this point, the pilots actively start discussing the landing approach scheme and stop monitoring the altimeters.
Delta 723, maintain heading 180.
At 11:04, the approach controller instructed to maintain a heading of 180 degrees to capture the signal from the localizer beacon and proceed with the final approach for landing. 45 seconds later, the commander stated that the localizer had come alive, indicating that the aircraft had captured the course through the glide slope system.
Boston approach, permission to proceed with the approach on the ILS, Delta 723.
Delta 723, approach on the ILS approved.
The crew receives clearance to proceed with the approach on the ILS, but no one is monitoring the altitude in the cockpit. Due to severe turbulence, the aircraft loses longitudinal stability, rocking up and down, and continues to descend. The crew extends the landing gear and flaps to the landing position. Weather conditions at Logan Airport continue to deteriorate, and visibility decreases even further. The aircraft is flying on instruments, and the crew cannot see the horizon. In fact, the aircraft is already below the glide slope.
Delta 723, communicate with the tower on frequency 190.1.
Boston approach, Roger, switching to tower on 190.1.
The crew contacts the controller stationed at Logan Tower and reports that they are on the glide slope. However, at that moment, the controller is occupied with 2 other aircraft and is not monitoring the landing of Flight 723, nor are the pilots controlling the altitude. In addition, Due to severe turbulence, the aircraft deviates from the course. Only after 1 minute does the controller come back on the line.
Delta 723 cleared to land on runway 4 right, vacate after landing. Visibility on the runway end is over 6,000. A bank of thick fog lies across the glide slope.
Roger, descending for landing.
At this moment, the pilots realize they are not in a landing position and that they need to go around for another attempt to land safely. However, the captain is unwilling to start over, especially considering that weather conditions could deteriorate again, so they decide to proceed with the landing at any cost. At an altitude of 50 meters, the captain pushes the engine control levers forward to increase thrust, and the pilots pull the control column towards themselves to gain altitude. But it was already too late. At 11:08, 50 meters to the right of the runway 04R axis and 914 meters from its threshold, Delta Flight 723, flying through the fog, crashed into the embankment on the edge of Logan Airport and exploded. The DC-9 aircraft disaster in Boston claimed the lives of all 89 people on board. Initially, only one passenger, 20-year-old Leopold Schwinner, survived the crash, but due to severe injuries, he passed away in the hospital on December 11 of the same year. At that time, this air disaster ranked 6th in the country and remains the deadliest aviation disaster in Massachusetts and in the history of Boston to this day. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, conducted the investigation into the crash of Flight DL-723. The final report of the investigation was published on March 7, 1974. According to the report, the most probable cause of the crash was the errors made by the crew, who failed to control the altitude of the aircraft and continued the instrument landing approach after passing the decision height, despite rapidly changing weather conditions and destabilization of the aircraft. The imbalance of the airliner resulted from passing the outer marker above the glide slope and at an excessive air speed. The pilots were overly absorbed in studying incorrect flight data displayed by the flight instrumentation system. Additionally, the fact that the aircraft was initially not on the glide slope was attributed to non-standard operations of the Logan Airport dispatch service. On January 25, 1974, the NTSB sent a letter to the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, urging them to improve the visibility determination system on the runway and to inform aircraft crews that visibility data on the runway does not reflect the actual situation in the landing zone.